from Nerd Church here. This is my final installment of my attempt to answer the question as well as I can. Why are there so few Catholic critical scholars? I've already pointed out to the things that in the 80s and 90s made it a lot less appealing for Catholics to get involved in critical biblical scholarship or, really even like church history if we aren't like aiming ourselves more or less at the Catholic Church. Yes, there's a few of us. They are rock stars. They are the ones who were hard enough to survive. Because ultimately, and this is the bottom line, biblical studies as it exists in the Western world was created by and for Protestants. It was created by Protestants who wanted to undermine the authority of the Catholic Church. I'm not going to relitigate the Reformation. It was also created by, it was also then created by, there was a Catholic counter argument, of course, but then good critical scholarship, real critical scholarship, the critical scholarship that fixes things rather than carrying water for power, happened because the Reformation system broke down. Because people were trying to read the Bible like a law code and like a history book when it wasn't. It was poetry and it was stories. It was folk tales. It was telling people this is how God wants you to be people. And then there was, and then, so then it broke, right? Literally, the Protestant Reformation broke the intellectual architecture of people all over Europe. And critical scholarship tried to put it back, but critical scholarship was trying to tear down the master's house using, not just using the master's tools, but ultimately critical scholarship was trying to repair the master's house using the master's tools. It was making modifications inside rather than, because there's two things that you can do with a hammer, right? When the house needs fixed, you can fix the hammer, or you can use that hammer to fix who the person belongs to. And to a great, because if, Sisera didn't really need that kingdom anymore, now did he? He did not. That's what stories do. The problem is that Protestants are told to take the Bible too seriously, to treat it as a history book, especially if they're ex-evangelical and have been given a buttload of religious trauma to pile on top of all of the stuff that they have to work through. I mean, honestly, it's a miracle, it is a miracle that any Protestant who is ever exposed to who is raised in biblical literalism manages to stay a Christian when they are done. Biblical literalism is something that if I were to come up with an intellectual technology designed to create atheists, I don't think that I could do better. Because basically what we do is it's the equivalent of telling a little kid about Santa Claus. And then when they point out that, well, how does Santa Claus deliver presents, right? You do one of two things. You either tell the kid that Santa Claus doesn't really exist. You tell the kid that physics doesn't work the way that they think physics works. Or you tell the kid that, well, Santa Claus is a miracle. Santa Claus answers prayers. Santa Claus breaks the laws of physics. And then when they grow up and they find out that a lot of times Santa Claus is the unpaid labor of men and women, that Santa Claus is the unpaid labor of their parents, that might make them feel like a little bit selfish for how they thought that it was all Santa Claus when they were kids, but it also teaches them a very important lesson about the power of unselfish giving. The problem is that if you start with the idea that the Bible is a history book, and that once you have debunked the history book, you're still free to do whatever you want to with the Bible, including using it as a club to beat the people who hurt you, you have made the critical error. And the critical error is this: you have bought the logic of biblical literalism to the degree that you think the Bible belongs to you. Now, the problem with that is that, and the thing is that good critical scholars know this, right? They are just glad that they have a seat at the table and a place in the conversation because they were taught to believe in the Bible. And they thought that when they quit believing in God, they had to stop believing in the Bible. And they are really happy that the one good thing that they really got out of that religious experience, besides their family, is the Bible. And they've got the Bible. The Word was God, and the Word was with God. Just saying. So, and yes, there is a completely crazy Catholic, mystical rant that I could go on, but that's not the one that you can hear. I'm speaking in the lowest formal register of Catholic I can, hoping that if I throw in a few Protestant words, you will hear me in the lowest formal register of Protestant and you'll understand what I'm saying. Because that's part of the problem we have in America, is that we have ethno-religions and we have ethno-religious dialects that nobody has paid attention to because we aren't telling the right stories. And that's my thesis, is that Protestant critical scholars aren't told that you can fact check something, you can fact check an opinion about a novel simply based on the assertion, I don't think that real people think like that. And that is fundamental to the Catholic imagination because, and I'll throw a few examples out here. If you need me to elaborate them, I will. These are just examples. If you hear what I'm saying, you'll hear it. If you don't, I'll ask some questions. I lost my faith in the Catholic Church in part because I was told that St. Catherine of Alexandria was no longer a saint, and that I should worship St. Catherine, and that I should take St. Catherine of Siena as my patron. And then I was told that by a very nice lady who told me St. Catherine was friends with the Pope. Yes, she managed to make St. Catherine of Siena, Doctor of the Church, sound boring. And my dad did the same thing with St. Teresa of Lisieux, also a Doctor of the Church, because he made her sound like a very nice, good girl who was very nice and very good. And she went to the convent and prayed, and she wrote a book, and now her mommy and daddy are saints. And that would be real, with a very nice undertone of, and it would be really nice if you could dedicate your life to getting me into heaven, because I'm not sure that I can make it. And frankly, no one deserves that amount of unpaid work. And also, I don't think that was what my dad actually meant to say. I think he actually meant to say, I think that you would find this saint interesting, and I think that learning about this saint would create a good effect in your life. He didn't say it right. I didn't hear it right. Maybe I was the wrong person to hear it. Maybe he was the wrong person to say it. I don't know. What I do know is that if I had been a Protestant, the idea that I could learn about another person who had lived thousands of years ago, who might not have even existed, but you can still learn things about her life. Like, you could reconstruct a hypothetical biography of St. Catherine of Alexandria or any of the other early virgin martyrs that would be true. You could also write the like Catholic virgin martyr Diocletian persecution like version of Percy Jackson, where it's like you are like the goal is to get to heaven. I don't know, maybe we need to set it in the modern world and do it with Jesus. Now, I know that I've said I was talking to critical scholars, and I know that I got off on this weird poetical tangent, and that's the point, is that Protestants are taught that the Bible is written in prose and fact, and that if you get poetry out of it, it's a little sneaky treat. It's like a chocolate chip, like sprinkled on in your pancake batter. Catholics are told that the Bible's poetry. Catholics are told to imagine these are real people and these are real people that you can have a relationship with, and maybe they're like and they're your dead relatives, right? These are your ancestors, but these are your real ancestors because these are the ones who chose the same parent that you chose. Because that's the other thing, is that Protestants get into all kinds of really weird debates about like um you know which of these patriarchs has the least horrible marital relationship, right? And should we look at, should we even consider David a role model at all or whatever? That's what a lot of Protestant discourse on the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible really comes down to, right? Catholics already have an answer to that question because of the way that we answer the question of the Trinity. Because, and this is where I'm getting into load-bearing dogmas, because we believe that we know what we know that we have the answer to the question, if God could choose a human family, what would that human family look like? And our answer is God chose a poor human family in the back of beyond, in the middle of nowhere, who had nothing and no chance, except that Joseph, the second he had the slightest iota of maybe not untrue, maybe possible, maybe I can convince myself that I should trust my woman. The second Joseph had a weird dream. He married Mary, and according to the Catholic story, they had a whole bunch of kids, and maybe they were cousins, and maybe they were adopted, and Catholics don't really care, because what we care about is that Mary was never required to have a baby again. She had one child. She gave Joseph a son. He had fulfilled his duty according to the law. And therefore, for whatever reason, and that is none of your business, and if you think and to a Catholic, if you ask, like, why didn't Joseph and Mary have more biological children? You are walking up to somebody whose mom or dad or cousin was an only child and saying, like, why was so and so an only child? Is like there's something wrong in their parents' relationship. Um, you know, you're um it it would be an insulting question, is the point I'm trying to get to. And if you're a man, imagine if you're a man who you have literally spent your entire life staring at a statue of Saint Joseph, usually wearing a pink dress, holding a baby, and on some level, that is your model of manhood. And so, to you, on some level, somebody asking, why didn't Joseph give the Virgin Mary more kids, is essentially the same as asking you, why isn't your wife pregnant? Like, it's been like a year since she had the last baby. Why isn't she pregnant again? Are you having some trouble? Is there a problem in your marriage? I mean, I'm not going to keep this going because I know some of the men who will be listening to that channel, and the only question in their mind is whether is if someone asked them that question, whether they would deliver the beat down or whether they would let their wife go at him first and then back clean up. And that's the effective relationship. That is the relationship that Catholics have with the Virgin Mary and that people have with Joseph. They are our parents. We are taught from childhood that when Jesus said to the beloved disciple, we are taught that the beloved disciple is a self-insert character, that you are supposed to be imagining yourself as the beloved disciple. And that when Jesus tells the beloved disciple, this is your mother, he is telling every Christian that Mary is their mother. And that's why Catholics get weird and defensive about the Virgin Mary, because on some level, she's our mom. And how true that is for every person, I cannot say. But it's true for a lot of us, and it's true for enough of us that when somebody reads something that suggests that, say, like, Jesus's conception might have been the result of SA, what it sounds like to us is that you're saying God let that happen to his mother. God decided that the incarnation was more important than Mary's consent. And Catholics have been taught that the angel Gabriel came down, and there are Catholic mystics who have said that Mary got Jesus's whole life zapped into her head Matrix style, or that the mysteries of the rosary are essentially what Mary saw at the moment of the Annunciation. That's coming in another video. I think it'll be good. There are lots of ways of understanding understanding a lot of Catholic theology, because a lot of the stuff, like, they will let mysticism cook, and as long as it does not reach the level of heresy, people can throw whatever they want in their gumbo. But it better be good when you dish it up. So the point is that we have people who are trained to think in poetry, who are trained to think in relationships, who have experienced the Bible for the first time as an oral document from infancy. Okay, this is just a, like, statistical fact. A Catholic baby who was born on, okay, a Catholic baby who was baptized on the feast of Christ the King will have heard 70% of the New Testament plus a good chunk of the Old Testament read to them over the course of the first 6 years of their life. That is a completely different way of encountering the Bible. We're not read, we read with. We don't read alone. We don't know how. That's why I had to make Nerd Church, because I don't know how to read the Bible on my own. I don't know how to interpret the Bible on my own. Because because my operating system that I was loaded with for a whole bunch of reasons is fundamentally an oral operating system. And that's different. And that means that, like, basically, y'all read the Bible like an Iron Age scribe. I read the Bible like I read the Bible like the I read the Bible like the wife of a nomadic sheep herder who's telling a story about Exodus to her kids and decides to throw in a kaiju frog so that they'll remember. Because kaiju frogs are freaking awesome. Now, and the thing is that both of those are in there, right? That's why the Bible survived. The Bible is poetry in prose. The Bible is order in chaos. The Bible is everything held into the most perfect dynamic tension that any human being has ever created, with the possible exception of the Quran. And the only reason why I'm willing to maybe give a hat tip to the Quran is because the Quran had a better narration and a better creation period, and the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, they had more time to cook, so they had to have a better editorial process, and we saw more of the mistakes. And maybe that's a good thing too, because you need poetry and prose, but you also need to go back and pull out the arguments that failed, because sometimes the arguments failed not because they were bad, but because it wasn't the right time to make that argument yet. And so what I'm saying is that there needs to be space made for us to operate in the world of critical scholarship, or in the world of religious studies, really in general, as Catholics, because we can learn to speak Protestant. If you're an American, you speak a Protestant dialect of English, right? It's just that if you're Catholic, the religious vocabulary is all in Catholic. Regardless, like it's all Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, and a little bit of Aramaic. That's why the Latin Mass lasted as long as it did, because it's why Arabic lasts as or Hebrew lasts as a liturgical language, because ultimately the vocabulary gets into the language to the point that you can that with a little bit of education, you can kind of sort of figure out what's going along. And Philo's right. Translations help you correlate meaning. Philo was right. You look at the Septuagint and you look at the Hebrew text, and then you realize that the Septuagint preserves older readings that aren't in the Masoretic text, because you have to have both, because you don't get rid of the Septuagint. And if you do have to get rid of the Septuagint, because you can't keep literacy in Greek, you've got literacy in Greek and you've got literacy in Hebrew, and you've got to pick. So some people pick literacy in Hebrew, other people pick literacy in Greek. We preserve both texts. Am I saying that God hid the Bible in two places just in case one got lost? Maybe. Let God be a metaphor. He did it once before. God built two temples, and the one on Mount Gerizim is still there. Does that mean anything? I don't know. Am I saying human existence, therefore God? Maybe I am, and maybe I'm rambling a little bit. But I finally figured out a way to explain this. And, you know, again, like, I know that I was throwing out some kind of crazy stuff about, like, Jacob and Rachel and Leah, right? And what I'm saying is that you could retell a version of that story 100,000 times, and all of them would be available readings. And I can tell you a version of that story that is not contradicted by the text, in which any one of those three people in that story is the one who has the penis. Like literally, read the story of Jacob and Leah and Rachel and assume that it's a story about one man and two women, and yes, the slaves of the two women, and that those slaves are also women, and that it's a story where there are four people who have uteruses and there is one person who has a penis. Then take away the names. Don't assume that gender is assigned at birth, and read that story and tell me who has the penis and who has the vagina. And that's an available reading. That's how flexible these texts are. And you're making them rigid. It's just that you're making them into glass that you can see through, because you poured out the nonsense that's biblical literalism. But the thing is, we never put any of that crap in our cup anyway. Or if we did, it was because we picked it up while we were sending our people paratrooping in to the SBL, or when we were sending grad students to study with like AJ Levine, so that they could take something like Jennifer Bird's book, which is the most brilliant work of biblical scholarship that I have ever read, because Jennifer Bird figured something out. And what Jennifer Bird figured something out, what she figured out is this. She figured out that in the Hebrew Bible, no one is regulating sex. No one is regulating love. What is being regulated is the rules around penis and vagina intercourse, and those rules are being set up in such a way that the only time that the physical act of, for lack of a better word, human mating can occur is because there are two people who are absolutely committed to taking care of any baby that results as the result of that pregnancy. And maybe in the Bronze Age, and maybe in the Iron Age, and maybe even today, that's really the best you can do to make sure that kid has a good start. Two parents who love them, I don't care what the biological relationships are. But I can say that as a Catholic. I don't know that I can say that as an evangelical Protestant without giving up on the Bible as a source of moral authority. And that's a hard question, and that's a conversation that I'd like to have, if anybody wants to have it. So, bye. And I might have to post clickbait. I apologize.